Hello, my name is Nader Rad and I'm here today with Professor Marco Vanhoucke, and we're going to talk about his new book. Mario is a professor in University of Ghent here in Belgium and also Fleuric Business School, and he also teaches in UCL School of Business and University College London. He's a founder of a company here called Operations Research and Scheduling Group. That was long, yeah. And you also have your own scheduling software. If I remember, the name was ProTrack.
Yes.
Yeah, which was very interesting, especially because it supports the earned schedule analysis, as I remember. He's very active in PMI Belgium chapter. He's got an award from IPMA for researching project management and many more, including multiple books. I know him mainly because of his older book, which was about earned schedule analysis, which was very interesting for me. And that was actually when I realized how great earned schedule analysis is. And since then, I've told many people about it. Because one of the problems that we have is that people are reporting measurements that are not really useful in the project. For example, only reporting person completes. But what we have in earned schedule analysis is really practical for managers. But that's another topic. Now, today we have this book, this new book from Mario, the Data-Driven Project Manager, which is very different from previous books, especially because it's like a novel.
It is.
Would you like to tell us why you decided to write the book like this?
Why a novel?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it was nice for a change. I mean, after, 8 books, academic books, I thought maybe I have to write something different because I love the act of writing. So that's one reason. But I think the main reason is that my previous books are, academic books. So I wrote them mainly from an academic point of view, which means that the methodology has to be correct. The underlying assumptions have to be clearly stated. I mean, it has to be academic, which means that also my audience is, I think, mainly researchers or maybe professionals, but with a strong background in those methodologies. Now, if I teach at companies, then I see that the underlying methodology is, of course, important, but the story and the relevance and how practical it is much more important than the methodology. And so if you teach to professionals, you tell a story. And after all those years, I know which parts of the story sounds good for people and which parts doesn't sound good. And then you change your story until everybody understands, that's a nice story. And now I understand why it's so relevant. And after 20 years of teaching, I thought, maybe I have to write down that story in a book. It's of course, it's not a real story, but it could have been a real story. And all the things that I have seen during my teaching sessions are written mainly in that book as a novel. So the main reason why I wrote it is to get a bigger audience, people with more practical relevance, rather than just academic people, researchers. That's the main reason.
Actually, it was in a conference a while back, a PMI conference, and one of the presentations in the conference was how you can use stories to make your point as a project manager. And it was very interesting, and that's something that you're doing here. But, that was about short stories, really. But this is more...
But storytelling, of course, is now very, very in those days. Storytelling, I mean, you have to tell a story, and while you tell the story, you bring the content. So maybe I thought, let's jump on that wagon too.
So your audience here is... at least part of your audience are project managers who are working in the field. Is that all, or also you have other?
No, I think it's. I try to reach a bigger audience. I think academics can learn from that story too, because typically academics focus only on the technical details, and they don't see the bigger picture. I think that book can help too for those academics to see that technical stuff is more than just statistics and data. Professionals, I think, can easily understand the technical stuff and the underlying methodologies because there is a story. I try to convince the people that it's relevant for a business. Plus, Plus, it's about statistics and data, of course. So there is a technical side in the story too. So I think I try to balance between easy and nice story and underlying sound methodology in that book.
In a way that it has something to offer to each type of audience.
I hope so. That's the whole idea.
Yeah. And can you summarize what you're going to teach people in this book? What type of content or knowledge they can expect from the book?
Yeah. Well, it's the content is, of course, what I also wrote in my other books, but it's a little bit more extensive in the sense the content is, if you build a schedule, then the schedule is, of course, just a schedule. Things go wrong. So a schedule is worthless unless you understand the risk of it. So things that go wrong. Risk management plus scheduling gives you a good foundation to run your project. And then I also talk about, if you run your project, if your project is in progress, then how do you measure performance? How can you take actions if things go wrong? How can you bring the problems back on track? How can you save the project and try to reach your objectives? And the underlying message is, if you measure the performance of a project, then you need a schedule, you need to understand risk, and the integration of those three dimensions means that you're going to become a better project manager. The reason why I call that data-driven project management is because it's a quantitative look. We use data. Data, it's popular those days, but we use data to build a schedule. We quantify risk, we quantify performance, we predict the future using data. That's, in a summary, the topic of this book.
Yeah. And I saw in the book that risk management is very important for you based on the main chapters that we have in the book. And for example, if you compare it to the knowledge areas in the PMBOK guide, not every knowledge area is covered in the book, but risk management has one chapter, and you don't have many chapters in the book.
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us more about that? Why it is important for the project managers to be more concerned about risk management? About
risk, yeah, of course. I think that project management and maybe business in general is all about risk. I sometimes say to my MBA students, if there was no risk involved in the business, then you were not here at the school. Because without risk, the future would be very deterministic, and then every decision that people made would be the perfect decision. But because of risk, decisions are difficult to take, and maybe it makes the life also challenging thanks to risk. So I thought risk is the core of project management. If you understand risk, then you can predict the future a little bit better. If you quantify risk, then maybe you're going to make better decisions. And project management is all about making decisions. Everybody says, if we make a schedule, then we never follow that schedule because things go wrong anyway. That's risk, right? Mr. Murphy, things go wrong. Yeah. So the core concept, in my opinion, about data-driven project management is trying to make better decisions. So that means trying to understand risk, because risk is a threat for making good decisions. So risk is indeed the core.
Yeah, that's right. I think everyone has at least some level of risk management activities in their projects or in their life.
I hope
we
so.
always do that. Yeah. A basic level of that. But it seems like in most projects, in many project managers don't try to improve that risk management into something that is structured and connected to other parts of their project management system. And for example, if you ask them, do you have risk management? They would probably say no, even though they have the basic intuitive type of risk management. I always wonder why this is so. Maybe it seems too difficult for them. Maybe we have failed to provide them with something simple or explain it in a simple way that makes it possible for them to use it. What do you think about that?
Well, what I think is this: risk is a very strange animal. Risk is sometimes or oftentimes about emotions. I mean, if you talk about risk, then people say, risk, I'm afraid of risk, or I love risk, or whatever it is. But risk is about emotions. It can damage your project. And what I try to say in that book is try to get rid of that emotional part of risk. Risk is something which can hurt your project. Maybe it can do a good thing too to your project. But if you quantify it, then at least you understand what it means. And then you can use on top of that quantification, maybe your own emotions, which is experience or your own gut feeling, and try to make a better decision. So I think that the main reason why people say, yeah, risk, we do a little bit risk, but not that much, is because risk is an emotional thing. And this is, of course, not my study. I mean, this is known in many books. I love the book of Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah, I wanted to say that it has all cognitive biases. For example, loss aversion or
those things.
Sunk cost effect. So your advice is that if people try to quantify it before they let their emotions take control of that type of decision, then it will lead to better decisions.
I'm truly convinced about that. Even if your emotions or your experience is correct, then at least you can confirm it by a quantification. Oftentimes your emotion is not always correct, but then at least you can steer your emotion or your experience towards the right decision by quantifying things. I think that is what I try to say in that book is not that data solves all the problems. What I also want to say is it's not only experience that solves the problems, it's a combination of the two. And that's a little bit the message in that book. Yeah. It's people and data, and together we're going to make better decisions. And risk, of course, is the reason why we have to make good decisions.
Okay, that's the whole point. An interesting message.
Thank you. That's what I try to write.
I mentioned the older book, which was about earned schedule analysis, and I think that's a really interesting concept. Well, maybe not in every type of project, but in the type of projects that I was involved with when I read the book, which was process plan projects and construction projects, it was very helpful.
Oh, great.
And yeah, it was really great, really great. You know, it's the correct way of thinking about the progress of the project, at least for some areas. And I saw that you also have a part of this book about earned schedule analysis. Yes. Would you like to tell us a little bit about earned schedule? Because I know that most people don't know about this technique or concept. And if they know, I think many of them will be interested in that.
Yeah. Well, the concept earned schedule, that's of course an old love of mine. I mean, I started somewhere in, 2006, doing research on that topic. And the reason why I started, let me first say this, is everybody or many people use earned value management, and then suddenly there was a kind of a new concept, earned schedule, and you had believers and non-believers. Some believers said, earned schedule is much better than earned value management, and then the non-believers say, no, it's just the same, I mean, you don't have to use it. And at that time, when I wrote my first book, I thought, I'm not a believer or a non-believer, I'm an academic, so I'm going to test things. I'm going to test when earned schedule is better than earned value management or the traditional earned value management, and when it is different. And so we did a lot of simulation studies first. And
that was very interesting for me.
Yeah, 4,000 projects, artificial projects. Later we tested that on real projects. And then we saw that basically sometimes it works, sometimes it fails. But at least we could tell why it works, why it fails, and how you can combine everything. So my view on this is, earned schedule is not fundamentally different than earned value. It's just a kind of a improved way to measure the performance of your project, the time performance of your project, when it is in progress. And then, of course, the research grew and grew and grew in the last 5 or 10 years. We have done a lot of things with earned schedule, up to statistical analysis, up to threshold methods, up to statistical project control, a lot of things which are not in the book, but what I want to say in this book is you have earned value management, you have earned schedule. If you combine them in an integrated system, I think you're going to measure the performance of your project in a much better way and hopefully making better decisions, of course.
Yeah. I was really impressed by the simulations in the book. That was a really good idea. The book is full of diagrams and numbers, which may be frightening for some people, but it's not a difficult book in my opinion, and it's very interesting. And one of the things that they've done is that they've simulated multiple projects based on certain criteria and then tried different ways of measuring time performance for all those simulations and showed which one is closer to what happens at the end of that project. And maybe to mention it from the more, I don't know how to say that, more project manager, non-academical point of view. One of the things, for example, that I always say in Princeton is that all measurements that you do, it pushes you to bring all measurements towards forecasting the time and cost that you need for completing your project, which is really helpful, because in many projects that I've seen, people are using measurements that are not really what they need. You have to measure something that you want to achieve. What do you want to achieve?
Yeah,
do you want
of course,
to know
yeah.
how many hours have been spent on the project? That doesn't make sense. Or for example, when you tell a senior manager that our progress was supposed to be 32%, but it is, for example, 28%. It doesn't, you're not giving them the real information.
No.
What happens is that senior manager is trying to convert those numbers, maybe at least intuitively or unconsciously, to see if they can finish the project on time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we do with earn and schedule analysis. And the result can be different. The result is more quality result. That's why it is important.
And it's indeed all about prediction. I mean, also the novel, it's about predicting the end result of your project. It's using data, and there is risk to predict the future progress of your project. That was in the original book like this. This is in this book also a little bit of story, how to predict.
Well, that brings me to another question. I wanted to ask you a few other things before talking about that. But now that you mentioned prediction, really the whole book leans toward predictive methods as opposed to adaptive or agile methods. And that's something that even you may have heard from people. Some people may, let me put it like this. Wherever you go, people are talking about agile. When you go to PMI conferences, for example, most presentations have something to do with agile, as if nothing else exists out there. And now you've written a book that is not about agile, and it's not really aligned with normal agile approaches. What's your idea about that? How do you see this whole thing?
Well, the reason, first of all, why I didn't write about agile project management is it's not my research topic. My research topic is more like this. But, and I think that's important, I don't see those two ways of managing project as two extreme forms of project management. I don't think that agile project management is something totally different than I write in the book. I think what I do in the book and what I do in my research is I provide a foundation, which basically says, make sure that you build a good schedule, make sure that you understand risk, and once you do your project, make sure that you monitor the performance, that you predict what you think you're going to have at the end of your project, and make sure that if you use that in a good and a sound way, make sure that you make actions, corrective actions, to bring your project back on track. I think that is also the philosophy of agile project management. Make sure that you are flexible and that you take actions to bring the project back on track. The difference, of course, I think, is that the agile project management says more about, you have to work in smaller steps because things are so variable over the life of the project that you have to be very flexible and you can adapt all the time, no matter what. I think that's a little bit the message that I try to tell too. So I think, my personal opinion, that agile project management is just one way of looking at this methodology.
But what about the fact that, for example, if you want to use the earn and schedule analysis or many other things that we have in the book, you need to have a schedule that is detailed. If the schedule is really high level, for example, you have only 20 or 30 items in the schedule, earn and schedule analysis won't work effectively, or maybe you don't agree with me on that.
I doubt. Of course, the more detailed your schedule is, the better. Then that's a fact. But for example, in my chapter on earned value management, I use the concept work package control, where I try to tell my audience, look, you don't have to look every time into the little details, because in theory that's the best approach, of course. But if you look at the higher level, so what you say, rather than all the details, more like big steps, then you can do earned value management too. And in my research, which is not written in the book, or maybe just between the lines, in my research I have shown that even if you do it this way, you make small mistakes, of course, because you leave the details behind, but mistakes are okay. I mean, you can still predict your time and your cost of your project in a more or less accurate way. So I think that one does not include the other.
So what you're saying is that when it's an agile project, then, because in agile, some people think that we don't have any type of planning in agile, which is not correct. Sometimes the whole project can be adaptive and emerge throughout the project the way some people do in a Scrum and can be fine, but sometimes you can start with a high level plan. For example, the way we have it in DSDM methodology, which is agile, another type of agile methodology. So there we have a high level plan and then we adapt throughout the project. And so what you're saying is that by having and using that high level plan, we can still incorporate the type of techniques that we normally have in predictive projects, such as earned value management, earned schedule analysis, different types of quantitative risk analysis, and so on.
I believe so. I think it's a matter of how much detail you put in your plan. And of course, if I explain those things, I go to the highest level of detail. But even that, what does it mean, the highest level of detail? That's a kind of a choice that you make, right? So you can say, okay, I go to maybe less detail, and then maybe you're going to mask some problems. But still, I believe that if you quantify, if you can make a schedule in Agile, maybe not a detailed schedule, but it's a schedule. You can analyze risk in Agile, maybe not on the activity level, but it's still risk. You can measure performance using earned value management. And that's the whole point. The mistake will be there compared to the detailed approach. But the mistake is not that big. And in that book, if you remember in the last chapter, I talk about a concept called control efficiency, which basically says, look, if you look at all the time at all the details, then of course that takes a lot of time and effort for the project manager. So looking at the details is always better from an academic point of view, but you're not going to be efficient. That's why I introduced that concept in the book. How can you be efficient? That means with a lower level of detail, how can you make good decisions? That's the whole point in the book. So that's why I say, yes, I believe that if you go more agile, so less to the detailed level, you can still make decisions in an efficient, control efficiency in an efficient way. So I truly believe that the answer is yes.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah,
that's good. So I'm going back to my previous questions. The other thing that I saw in your book that was interesting for me was the critical chain method.
Yeah.
Well, I think you believe that it's practical for project managers. Maybe you can tell us a really short introduction if someone doesn't know what critical chain method is.
That was a hard one, I have to admit. Adding critical chain in my book, and I tell you the reason why. I wanted to talk about resource scheduling because, if people use software like Microsoft Project or whatever, they have resources and they schedule the whole thing. And I hear a lot of people complaining about those tools because they construct schedule with resources and it's not very realistic and so on. So I thought, how can I add resource scheduling in a book which aims at providing a relevant story to people without going to all those technical stuff about resource scheduling? And I thought maybe I have to add the concept of critical chain buffer management. Now, critical chain buffer management, of course, I think it's a story that everybody knows, but it's basically saying, okay, if we build a resource schedule, then of course there is risk involved, so we should buffer a little bit. And the nice story about the methodology critical chain buffer management is that the buffers that you put in your schedule are put in a clever way in the schedule such that it tries to protect your project in the best possible way. Now, I did not follow the complete technique of critical chain buffer management in that book. There are other books for that. But at least the underlying idea is in the book where I said, look, if you buffer your project, you can do it in different ways, following the principles of critical chain, and all those ways have only one goal, and that is, if something goes wrong, here we are again, risk. If something goes wrong, then at least you can make better actions. So I'm not sure whether I really discuss the academic technique critical chain buffer management, but at least the ideas of it are in one chapter of the book.
Yeah, I got to know critical chain many years ago, and I found it very interesting. For me, the way I saw it was about the student syndrome and Parkinson law, and the idea was that when you're estimating the duration of activities, for example, you're always adding some padding to those activities because you know that something may go wrong. And the way I saw it may not be 100% precise. The idea was to remove all those paddings so the duration that you have for your activity is the absolute optimistic duration. And then your whole schedule will be much shorter. And then you will use that extra time to create buffers and add them to different places in your chains.
Correct. Yeah.
And then we know that some of those activities may be behind your schedule, something may happen, the risks that you mentioned, and then we expect to spend some of those buffers based on how much of the activities are done. For example, if you're done with 50% of the project, then in a very simplified way, you can expect to have to spend about 50% of your buffers. Or if you have to spend 90% of your buffers, you will know that you're behind schedule. The whole thing was interesting for me, but there was a huge problem.
Yeah.
How do you want to do that?
Yeah, that's
there was only one plugin for Microsoft Project that could do it, and it didn't work properly for me. So for a project manager, for practical purposes, what would you suggest?
Well, what I suggest is the whole philosophy of critical chain, and what you mentioned, you cut your activity durations in smaller pieces, so you remove parts and then you put it back in the schedule as a kind of a buffer. I think that the whole philosophy of critical chain is important to realize that that risk is the biggest threat for your project, and then you should buffer your project in the best possible way. And how can you do that? Well, first of all, not by adding buffers to every little activity, what you mentioned, the student syndrome. So I think that's nice to realize that people buffer without maybe knowing, they buffer all the time. You shouldn't do that. You should buffer your project. But secondly, how do you size the buffer of your project? By understanding what the risk is. And so here I am again. You have to quantify risk in order to size your buffer in a proper way. Now, I realize that this is not an answer on your question, because your question was, but how can you convince people? How can you convince people that they should put their buffers on strategic places in your project rather than in your activity?
No, that was not really my question.
So that was
no, the question
because that's
is,
an important.
What type of software are you going to use?
What kind?
Let's say that you're convinced, so now you want to do it.
Okay.
Which
there are not many software tools here. I know. I used to use ProChain, which is an add-in in Microsoft Project a little bit. Yeah, okay, but I think that this part. Honestly, if I should do it, I shouldn't do it with a software tool. I should use the philosophy of buffering to try to convince your people that protecting activities cannot be the goal. It is protecting your client, it's protecting your project. That is the goal. And the way you do it, I don't think you need a software to put those buffers here or there. I think that if you understand the principle, you're gonna construct your schedule in a totally different way. Maybe not following 100% the logic of critical chain, but in a totally different way, and gonna put buffers to protect what you really have to protect, your objectives.
So, what I understand from your explanations is that even if you don't have a full-blown system for doing it in your software, you can still be influenced by the theories behind critical chain and let it help you in your project, and still you can do some simple critical chain analysis manually.
Honestly, that's the whole idea of the whole book. If I teach in companies, then one of the first things that I say is, look, it's nice to have software tools, but my advice is, if you're new, don't use them. Try to understand what the principles are, and maybe if you want to make the step, maybe start with Excel if you have a small project. And if it grows, well, then you don't have another choice than go to the big software tools. But once it grows, it means that you're already mature enough to understand how those tools work too. So I think data-driven project management is not about tools. It's not about software. It's about understanding what it means, and a tool can help you, of course, but a tool is just a tool. So I think that most of the things that I discuss in this book can be done in Excel. And by the way, all the pictures of tools in my book are constructed in Excel for projects that I did for a couple of companies. And most people want Excel. I mean, the best tool in the world.
Yeah. You can do everything.
Yeah.
So, I've got two more questions.
Great.
One of them is that, again, when you go to conferences, we don't have many technical presentations. it's as if people are not thinking about technical aspects of project management anymore. There's this triangle in PMI, for example, technical, project management, strategic, and leadership. Most of them are about those other things. They are about more human aspects of projects. What do you think about that? Should we pay more attention to technical project management, or is it fine like this?
Well, honestly, I think that if I look at conferences 10 years ago, it was all about the human part. I think that more and more people go to the technical side. Of course, still the human side, the majority talks about that human side, of course. But I think that thanks to that big data hype, everybody is talking about data science and big data. I think that more and more people realize that having data is nice, but if you don't do anything with it, it's worthless. So I think that we should go more into that technical thing, into that data-driven thing. And I'm very hopeful that people will do that, because I see that many companies, not only in project management, many companies are interested in we used to call it statistics, now we call it big data. And they use those words like machine learning and all those fancy things, but I think they should start with the easy part. What is data? What do you do with it? How do you quantify performance? And maybe later in the second stage talk about those more advanced stuff like machine learning or artificial intelligence. I think that we will go automatically more to a data-driven business and society. So yes, I think we should focus more on that technical side of project management. Now, of course, the conference where I go to focus sometimes a little bit too much on the technical side and forget the human side. That's exactly why I try to focus a little bit both in my book on both the technical, data-driven, and the human side, because they are both important, of course.
Yeah. Okay, you mentioned something that was related to my last question, but I'm going to ask my planned last question once again. What do you think about the future of project management? 20, 30, 50 years from now.
The future is about data, I think. I'm writing another book, by the way, about data in projects. I think that I cannot predict the future. Even if I write books about prediction, I cannot predict the future. But I think that there is no doubt that the data science is here and is here to stay. And I think that business within 10 or 20 years will all about data, algorithms, machine learning. I think that more and more processes will be done automatically, and decisions will be done automatically. So I think this is also true for project management. Now, in our research, we focus already a little bit on that. Like, for example, let's go back to that earn value and earn schedule system. Earn value is a system that gives you metrics to measure the performance of your project, to predict time and cost and so on. But it doesn't give you anything tangible how to make decisions. It's a tool that measures, and it's up to the project manager to make decisions. I think that we can bridge those two worlds. If we use like statistical project control, which is a tool that uses machine learning on top of that earned value management, then maybe we can suggest some decisions to the project manager and saying, look, that suggestion is more likely to succeed than this suggestion, because the data says that in previous projects we saw that this was the case. So we're working a little bit on that, and then there is a nice name for that, reference class forecasting and all those fancy names, which basically say if you look at the past and you use the data from the past for your future decisions, then most likely you're going to make better decisions. So I think that the future is about automation, data, algorithms, machine learning, and trying to propose decisions to a project manager rather than just monitoring the progress. That's my best guess.
That's interesting. However, there's a follow-up question. So, if those things are going to be automated, there will be a group of people working on the technologies related to those things. But because those things are automated, they will free up some of the time of the project managers, and they can trust the first group of people probably. So, what would they do in that future? What will those people be focused on, in your opinion?
Maybe they can go back to the people again and focus very much on only the people, which was the and the most important part of project management. But no, I don't think that algorithms and data will replace the project managers and the decisions. I think it will just, things will become more and more complex probably, and they will propose decisions. So I think that the role of the project manager will not change very, very, very much. I think they still have to take into account risk, still think about what are the best possible solutions, still think about and talk about, to their people and their clients. But I think we're going to have tools, data-driven tools, to at least do some analysis and predict the impact of their decisions in a much better way than ever before. So I think it's just about being more sure what the quality of your decisions are if you take them in advance, rather than just try and see what happens. I think that's what the future is. And that's why I'm thinking about writing a new book about data. I have ideas, but I now need time.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. I'll be looking forward to that. And how far away is that future?
The future will unfold in steps, of course.
Yes.
But let me say what we're working on right now. In that novel, I, for example, show that if you do some Monte Carlo simulations, then you can predict a little bit the risk of your project and so on. And then I say, but it all starts with data. You need data, distributions and statistics, and sometimes you don't have them. And if you don't have them, then you need your best guess for the distributions, but those guesses might be wrong. Now, what we are now working on is we are trying to develop some methodologies to look at projects in the past, and out of those projects, we're going to try to build distributions that are relevant for the future. That's, I think we're going to be ready with that. Not only me, it's a team, of course, within a couple of years. I think that once we have this, I think that this will be the connection between the past and the future, because then we have a tool to look at the past and predict the future. Then from that moment on, I think it's up to us academics to develop more powerful tools with machine learning to automate those decisions. But I think the first important step is, how can we transform data from the past into the future before we start with developing algorithms? So I think if you ask me, when is that future? Then I think, say, within 5 years or so, I think many people, many academics, many people will jump on the more advanced technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, neural networks. And then, of course, I don't know how long it will take until that academic output will be transformed into methodologies for the business. I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years. I have no clue, of course, about that. But we are working on that, and we is the academic world.
That's interesting. So how about getting back here in 5 years and talking about this topic
That's
again?
a good deal.
Okay.
Great. For my other book, maybe.
Yeah.
A little bit time pressure to write a new book is okay.
Okay. So that's great. I'm done with questions. If you would like to add something before we go.
Not very special, maybe only one thing. If you read the book, then of course I hope that you love it, and I hope that you love both parts of my book. Of course, the technical part and what it means for your business and how relevant it is for your business. I hope that you love that, but also the story behind it, because it's my first novel. I'm not an author. I mean, at least not of novels, but at least I try to also make that novel a little bit interesting. And there is a little bit not a love story, but people are strange, as you know. That's also a little bit in the book. I hope you like that too.
Great, that's great. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for watching.